The war had ended, but the silence it left behind was heavier than the battles themselves. Across the military base in Nevada, soldiers walked with guarded eyes, their hearts still tied to the fear of the Illyrians, the towering alien beings who had once been Earth's most feared enemy. They were taller than any human, their luminous skin glowing faintly under sunlight, and their voices resonated like low music carried through stone walls. To many, they were a reminder of near defeat, a living memory of destruction that no treaty could erase. Captain Daniel Hayes, however, was different. He was not untouched by the scars of war. He had lost comrades, his friends, and even a brother. But instead of turning bitter, he turned thoughtful. He believed that peace was more than a document signed between leaders. It was a choice that ordinary people had to make every single day. Without that choice, the war would live on forever in their minds. So, when the Joint Bonding Program was announced, a daring project to pair one human with one Illyrian, forcing them to live, train, and work together, most soldiers refused. They muttered about danger, betrayal, and humiliation. Daniel, however, stepped forward. He didn't make a speech. He didn't explain why. He simply wrote his name down and accepted whatever came next. That decision brought him face to face with Commander Solara, one of the Illyrians' most respected warriors. The first time he saw her, she stood like a statue at the center of the meeting hall, her broad shoulders framed by the pale blue light of the alien insignia on her chest. She was taller than any human present, her head nearly brushing the high ceiling. Her eyes glowed faintly silver, unblinking as she surveyed the humans before her. Soldiers whispered under their breath, some shifting uncomfortably, others narrowing their eyes in mistrust. Daniel walked toward her with steady steps. He felt the weight of her presence pressing against him, not in threat, but in sheer force of being. She was not just a soldier, she was a legend among her kind. To stand before her was like standing before a mountain. Still, he refused to look away. Solara studied him in silence. He was shorter, leaner, his face marked by faint lines of exhaustion that only years of combat could carve. But his gaze was unwavering. He did not flinch, did not step back. She tilted her head as if testing his resolve without words. The program officials spoke briefly, announcing their pairing. The room buzzed with quiet disbelief. Humans whispered that Daniel had been foolish. Illyrians exchanged low tones of doubt. But Daniel ignored them all. He extended his hand towards Solara, a gesture so simple yet filled with risk. For a long breath, she stared at it. Then, with a deliberate slowness, she lowered her massive hand and let it meet his. Her skin was warm, her strength overwhelming, but her grip was measured, almost careful. That moment sealed their bond. From then on, Daniel and Solara were assigned to share living quarters, training schedules, and daily routines. On their first walk through the base together, heads turned and whispers followed. Some soldiers sneered, others laughed under their breath. The Illyrians remained distant, offering Solara respectful nods but little else. She walked with a posture of iron discipline, never reacting to the eyes that trailed her. Daniel, too, kept his expression steady, though he could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on him. In their quarters, silence hung between them. Daniel unpacked his few belongings, his brother's old wristwatch, a folded photograph of his unit, a notebook he carried everywhere. Solara, on the other side, placed a small crystal orb on her shelf. It glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. He didn't ask what it was, and she didn't offer an explanation. Days were filled with joint exercises. Daniel would run beside her during endurance drills, his breath sharp and fast while hers remained steady. He sparred with her in combat practice, thrown to the ground more times than he could count, but always standing back up. She never mocked his failures, never gloated. Instead, she observed, adjusted, and fought with precision. It was as if she was waiting for him to understand something deeper than strength. At night, Daniel sometimes caught her standing by the window, staring at the horizon where the desert met the stars. There was no arrogance in her stance, only quiet solitude. He wondered what she saw, what memories lingered in her mind. But he didn't ask. Not yet. What made their bond unique wasn't grand gestures or loud words, it was the small moments. The way Solara lowered her gaze ever so slightly when speaking with him. The way Daniel treated her not as a threat or a trophy, but as a person. He spoke to her with respect, never fear, never flattery. And though she answered sparingly, her tone softened by degrees each day. Still, the tension around them grew. Other soldiers began to talk more openly. Hayes has lost it, some said. You don't bond with monsters, you fight them. Daniel heard the comments, but never replied. He had chosen his path, and nothing would sway him. Solara, for her part, noticed more than she revealed. She carried herself with silence, but her eyes sometimes lingered on Daniel, searching, questioning. The bond was fragile, uncertain, and filled with shadows of doubt from the world around them. Yet Daniel knew in his heart that this was only the beginning. Solara was not his enemy, not anymore. She was something far more complicated, something worth discovering, no matter the cost. And though neither of them spoke it aloud, they both felt the same truth pressing quietly between them. Their connection would change everything. The first weeks of the program were not easy. Daniel and Solara trained side by side, ate their meals in the same hall, lived in the same assigned quarters, yet silence often stretched between them. It was not a silence of anger, but of distance. They came from different worlds, and the weight of history sat between every word. Still, Daniel was patient. He had chosen this bond knowing it would never be simple. Training sessions pushed both of them. Daniel, though skilled, had to work harder to keep pace with Solara's immense strength and endurance. She could run across the desert terrain for hours without slowing, while Daniel's breaths grew harsh, sweat pouring down his back. But he never quit. Each time he stumbled, he forced himself back up. Each time he lost his footing in sparring, he reset his stance. Solara noticed. She did not praise him, but she began to hold back less, as if she respected the way he refused to surrender. The breakthrough came one evening after an exhausting day. The two of them had completed a long drill that left Daniel's muscles aching. He sat on the floor of the training hall, wiping sweat from his face, while Solara stood nearby, her expression unreadable. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, in her deep, calm voice, she spoke. You do not fear me. Daniel looked up at her, surprised by her words. He gave a faint smile. I've seen too much loss to waste time on fear. I see someone who fights the same battles I do. Her silver eyes studied him with an intensity that felt almost like a test. Then, for the first time, she gave a small nod, not of agreement, but of recognition. That night was different. From that moment, their silence softened. Solara began to speak more short answers at first, then longer thoughts, when she realized Daniel listened without judgment. She spoke of her people's traditions, of the songs they sang to honor the fallen, of the endless stars that guided their journeys. Daniel, in turn, shared pieces of his own life, his brother's memory, the quiet fields of his hometown, the way Earth's sunsets burned gold across the horizon. Slowly, a fragile bond grew between them. But while they found a rhythm with each other, the world around them was less kind. Human soldiers whispered openly when Daniel passed. Some mocked him, saying he had surrendered his pride by standing beside an Illyrian. Others called him reckless. Among the Illyrians, there were also doubts. Some of Solara's kin questioned why one of their strongest commanders wasted time with a human soldier. So small in comparison. Daniel heard the words. Solara, too, could not ignore the stares. Yet when they stood together, the weight of judgment seemed to fade. One evening, while sharing a late meal, Daniel noticed how Solara shifted her chair slightly lower. A subtle gesture so she wouldn't tower as much over him. It was the smallest act of consideration, but it stirred something deep inside him. He realized she was trying, in her own way, to meet him halfway. It wasn't just her strength that drew him, it was her discipline. Her quiet patience and the way her laughter, rare as it was, seemed to change the air around them. Once, during a break in training, Daniel made a dry remark about how humans were terrible at running compared to Illyrians. To his surprise, Solara laughed. The sound was low, melodic, and fleeting, but it lingered in Daniel's chest long after. The bond that began as a program was becoming something personal. Still, pressure built. One night, after hearing a group of soldiers mocking him just outside their quarters, Daniel sat in silence, staring at the floor. Solara noticed. She asked nothing at first, but when he finally spoke, his words were steady. "They don't understand, but I don't care. I didn't come here to please them. I came here to build something that lasts." Solara's gaze lingered on him, unreadable, but softer than before. She did not reply, but he caught the flicker of respect in her eyes. The turning point came during a joint strategy exercise. Daniel and Solara were asked to lead a mixed team of humans and Illyrians. Tension filled the group from the start, humans doubting Illyrian orders, Illyrians ignoring human input. But Dani? Storm clouds rolled over the desert base one night, lightning flashing in the distance. Daniel and Solara had been assigned to a late patrol along the outer perimeter. The air was heavy, charged with electricity, and the silence between them carried an edge that was not their own. They could feel tension stirring among the soldiers, whispers growing louder each day. Some humans had never accepted that Illyrians could be trusted, and some Illyrians believed bonding with humans weakened their honor. That night, the tension broke. As they circled a checkpoint, 3 human soldiers stepped out from the shadows. Their rifles were slung over their shoulders, but the hostility in their eyes was sharper than any weapon. One of them, a broad-shouldered sergeant, sneered, "Didn't know patrols came with babysitting giants? Hayes, tell me, are you her guard dog or her pet?" Daniel froze. He had expected whispers, not confrontation. Solara stood tall, her silver gaze calm but unyielding. She didn't move, didn't answer. The sergeant took a step closer, his voice rising. "You think we're safe walking around with one of them? How many of our brothers did her kind burn into the ground? And you standing here like she's your partner? You shame us all." Daniel's jaw tightened. He stepped forward, blocking their path to Solara. His voice was steady, louder than the storm overhead. "If you see her as an enemy, then you see me as one too." The sergeant laughed bitterly. "Careful, Hayes. You're choosing sides." Lightning flashed, and in that brief light, Daniel saw the hands of the soldiers twitch near their weapons. His heart pounded, but he didn't move aside. He held his ground, his voice cutting through the storm. "I've already chosen. She's not my enemy. Not tonight, not ever." For a long moment, the air seemed to freeze. Then the soldiers muttered curses and backed away, their boots crunching against gravel as they disappeared into the dark. Daniel stood still until the sound of their footsteps faded completely. When he turned, Solara was watching him. Her face, always so composed, carried something unguarded: surprise, confusion, and something deeper she did not often allow to surface. Her voice, low and steady, broke the silence. "Why would you risk everything for me?" Daniel exhaled slowly. He stepped closer, rain starting to fall between them, drops glimmering against her luminous skin. "Because no one else sees what I see. You're not a threat to me, Solara. You're not a monster. You're a soldier who's fought battles, who's carried scars just like me. I don't care what anyone else says. You're not my enemy." Her silver eyes softened, and for the first time, she turned her gaze away. The rain streaked down her cheeks, but Daniel wondered if some of that shine was more than storm water. Illyrians were not built for tears, yet her silence told him enough. The rest of the patrol passed in quiet, but it was not the same quiet as before. Something had shifted. The distance that once stood between them had broken. Back at their quarters, Daniel sat at the small desk, pretending to write in his notebook, though his thoughts were elsewhere. Solara stood by the window, her massive frame outlined against the storm. Finally, she spoke again, her voice softer than he had ever heard. "Among my people, loyalty is not spoken, it is proven. You have done so tonight." Daniel turned toward her, his tone quiet but firm. "Loyalty isn't a duty for me. It's a choice, and I've made mine." She looked at him then, really looked, as though seeing beyond the uniform, beyond the program. For the first time, Daniel felt the weight of her guarded heart beginning to lower its walls. The following days carried the echo of that night. Soldiers looked at Daniel differently, some with anger, others with wary respect. Solara's kin observed him too, though none spoke openly. But between Daniel and Solara, an unspoken truth lingered. He had stood for her not because a program demanded it, but because his heart left him no other option. Training grew more intense, and their teamwork sharper. Daniel noticed how she adjusted her stance to match his speed, how she gave space for his strategies, how she trusted his decisions even when they clashed with her instincts. And Solara noticed the way he watched her, not with fear, but with a quiet admiration that never sought to own, only to understand. One evening, after another grueling day, Daniel found himself watching her as she adjusted her armor. The glow of the Illyrian crystal she carried lit her features softly. She caught his gaze, and instead of looking away, she asked, "Do you not grow tired of being questioned, of being judged?" Daniel gave a small smile. "I grew tired of it long ago. Now, I just choose what matters. And you matter." Her breath caught, subtle but clear. She said nothing more, but the silence between them was filled with more meaning than words could hold. For Solara, the breaking point of mistrust had become the breaking point of something else. Something she had never allowed herself to imagine. To be seen not as a warrior or a weapon, but as a person. To be defended not for duty, but for who she was. It unsettled her. Yet it also warmed her in ways she couldn't explain, and for Daniel. The bond he once signed up for in the name of peace had turned into something far deeper. His loyalty had crossed the line into something his heart could no longer deny. That night, as the storm clouds finally cleared and the desert stars spread wide above them, Daniel lay awake, knowing one truth: the bond had changed forever. And it was only a matter of time before the world noticed too. The days of the program slipped away faster than either Daniel or Solara expected. What had once felt like an endless trial was suddenly nearing its end. Soon, both would be called back, Daniel to his human unit, Solara to her Illyrian command. The thought hung over them like a shadow, unspoken but heavy. One evening, the base felt strangely quiet. The desert winds were still, and the stars shone without interruption. Daniel walked to the observation deck, knowing instinctively where he would find her. Solara stood there, tall and motionless, gazing out at the endless night sky, the glow of the stars reflected in her silver eyes, making her look both powerful and heartbreakingly alone. "You'll miss this view," Daniel said softly as he approached. Solara did not turn. Her voice was calm, almost distant. "I will miss more than the stars, but such is the way of duty. You will return to your world, and I to mine. That is how it must be." Daniel stepped closer, shaking his head. "No, that's how it's supposed to be. But we don't have to accept it." At last, she looked at him. Surprise flickered across her face, quickly hidden beneath discipline. "What do you mean?" He swallowed, his heart pounding. I don't want this to end. Not our bond, not what we've built. I don't care what others think. They mocked me, they doubted you, but none of that matters. You're not just my partner in some program, Solara. You've become more than that." For a long moment, silence hung between them. Solara's eyes searched his face, as if trying to see past his words to the truth beneath them. "Do you understand what you were saying?" she asked quietly. "To walk this path would mean standing against both our worlds. You would face doubt, ridicule, perhaps even exile. And I," her voice faltered, rare for someone so steady, "I would risk dishonor among my people. You would bind your future to mine, knowing there is no certainty, no safety." Daniel took another step forward, his voice steady. "I know, and I don't care. I've fought wars, I've buried friends, I've seen how fragile life really is. If I've learned anything, it's that you don't turn away from the one thing that feels true. And you, Solara, you are the truest thing I've ever known." Her breath caught, subtle but real. She lowered herself slowly, bending until her eyes were level with his. For the first time since they had met, there was no barrier in her gaze, no guarded strength. Only vulnerability, raw and unhidden. "Only one human soldier had the courage to bond with me," she whispered, the words trembling as though they carried the weight of centuries. Daniel reached out. Her hand, massive and strong, hovered uncertainly before him. He placed his smaller hand against hers. The size difference was overwhelming, but in that touch, there was no imbalance, only connection. His warmth pressed against her glowing skin, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to fall away. They stood like that, hand against hand, heart against heart, under the vast ocean of stars. It was not dramatic. It was not loud, but it was real. A soldier and an alien giant, bound not by treaty or command, but by choice. The days that followed carried whispers. Some soldiers noticed how Daniel and Solara walked together more closely now, how their silences were filled with understanding rather than distance. Some Illyrians exchanged knowing glances when Solara's voice softened slightly when speaking to him. No one said it aloud, but many felt that something had changed between them. On their final day, when officials declared the program a success, Daniel and Solara stood side by side. To the world, they were proof of peace, evidence that former enemies could work together. But to each other, they were something far more, a bond that no one else could define. When it was time to part, Daniel felt a heavy knot in his chest. He turned to her, unwilling to hide the truth. Whatever comes next, wherever they send us, I won't let this bond break. Not distance, not doubt, not anything. Solara's eyes softened. She lowered herself again, so close he could see the faint shimmer in her silver gaze. Then neither will I. For Daniel, that was enough. For Solara, it was everything. As the transport ships prepared to leave, the desert winds rose once more, carrying dust across the